So 15 feet of water, we want to put out 75 feet. Okay, I'm on it. Yep. Pretty sure I got 75 feet out. What do you mean we're dragging? Okay, I'll put out more. I feel like we've got enough out. Wow, this is a lot of chain. Are you sure we're in 15 feet of water? The trick when you're anchoring is to put out the right amount of scope. If you don't have your anchor chain or rode marked, it's kind of hard to know how much scope you have out. Hi, I'm Nico Waters, and welcome to the Boat Galley Podcast. I'm talking about marking your anchor chain, why it's important, and a few different ways you might choose to do that job. Today's episode of the Boat Galley Podcast is sponsored by CLR Marine, suppliers of the Extend Your Step boarding ladder extension. Is your boat ladder just too short to comfortably and easily get out of the water? Extend Your Step fits right onto your existing boarding ladder, offering a stable and easy way to get a longer ladder. Find the Extend Your Step and so many other fabulous products at clrmarine.com. Boat Galley Podcast listeners get a special 15% discount on the Extend Your Step at CLR Marine through December 31st, 2023. Use the coupon code BOATGALLEY2023. CLR Marine, where your boat is our business. We've talked a lot on the Boat Galley Podcast about a whole anchoring system and the fact that it's not just one anchor, it's not just one road, there's not one answer to what the best is. But one of the things that is really important to do, whether you have chain or rode or some kind of combination, one of the things that you've got to do is to mark your chain or line so that you know exactly how much you have out. Why do you need to know how much you've got out? Because one of the pieces that's important in anchoring correctly is making sure you have enough anchor rode out. That's line or chain or the combination thereof. There are a number of different formulas that people talk about. Generally, a pretty good rule of thumb is 3-to-1 for all chain. Some people talk about 5-to-1 for all chain. They talk about 7-to-1 if it's line. The depth that you're in, the weather you have coming up, the bottom, the number of people around you, what your neighbors are like. There's a whole lot that goes into figuring out how much anchor rode you want to have out. But if you don't know how much you have out, you will be absolutely in that position that I was in the intro. We went into Atlantic City, New Jersey in the middle of the night after a very rough start to what was supposed to be a pretty nice, calm, chill cruise up to New England. And one of the things we had forgotten to do right before we left was to mark our anchor chain. In the middle of everything else we had going on, it just didn't feel like it was that important. Spoiler alert, it's that important. I think we figured out later that maybe we had out 2-to-1 and not the requisite 3 or 5. And when we finally put out a whole lot more chain, we were able to catch just fine. Fine, you know why you need to mark your anchor line and chain, but how do you do it? There are a few different ways that you can choose to do that. And one is that you yourself are choosing not to mark it at all, but you are relying on some kind of mechanical counter that comes on your windlass. Well, another one that doesn't involve any marking or touching of your chain or rode in any way, shape, or form is you can count. You could say, okay, when I'm holding the windlass button down, it goes out at this amount of feet per second, and therefore I know that I have out 10 feet every 10 seconds. That's great, as long as you can be consistent with your counting or letting things go and not losing track of how much time you have been letting your anchor line out. If your windlass has a mechanical counter, if you are fine just using a stopwatch and you're confident in your consistency of how you deploy your anchor rode, you can stop listening right now because it won't matter. But for most of us, we need to physically mark our chain in some way, shape, or form. And there are, of course, a number of different ways to do this. Keep in mind that this chain is going into the water. And so anything that you put on your chain has the possibility of coming off of that chain and winding up in the environment. Keep that in mind, please, as you choose what you're going to use to mark your line. As always, what you choose to mark your chain with is a trade-off, and it's a balance between environmental concerns, ease of application, length of time that it's going to stay on that chain. For physical marks on the chain, you have things like wire ties that are very, very simple to apply. They take almost no time at all, easy enough to wrap through a chain link, pull it tight. They generally go through your windlass without too much trouble, although if you leave a super long tail on there, that tail can get stuck in your windlass. But remember that as the plastic winds up going through your windlass, it is likely to shear off. And when it shears off, that plastic winds up in the water. Though it's a very fast and cost-effective way to quickly mark your anchor chain, it's not the best from an environmental standpoint. Another way to mark your chain is to paint it. You can use spray paint. You can use some kind of nail polish. People will use nail polish and paint on the links. You have to make sure that your anchor chain is totally dry before you do that, obviously, and clean. That will also flake off as it hits the windlass. It is subject to degradation as it is in the salt water, so you just maybe will have to reapply that more frequently. People will use different colors to indicate the different intervals that they have, and that works great in the daytime. It's a little harder to see at night. It's a little harder to see any paint at night unless you are using a headlamp or have a flashlight that is on your anchor chain as it's being deployed. You can thread cotton strips through the anchor chain. People do this with some kind of ease. It, again, will have no problem going through a windlass. Cotton is generally biodegradable, so that's not a bad option, although figuring out how to tie it off so that it doesn't come off the chain is a little bit more challenging. You can also buy commercial plastic clips that go on to mark your anchor chain. They are supposed to easily go over the windlass. They're going to have the same environmental issues that wire ties do, but they perhaps are a little bit cleaner. They don't have these kind of funny little tails that come off of them, and they may do a better job of going through the windlass, although we have not had any trouble with wire ties going through our windlass at all. And one that a lot of people are doing, and I actually would like to do for Mischief before we put Mischief in the water this year, is to sew webbing strips onto your chain at the intervals that you choose. Trying to figure out how to differentiate the intervals is an interesting other conundrum to marking your anchor chain. We tend to mark our anchor chain. The first marker is at the 50-foot mark, and then we do it every 25 feet thereafter, because we realize that we probably won't ever put out less than 50 feet of chain. Even if we're anchoring in 10 feet of water or even less, 50 is kind of our go-to. That's what we start with. We feel pretty much that if we're going to put out more than that, we're going to go to probably the 25-foot marks from there. So the 25-foot intervals make sense to us. We wouldn't ever really put out less than 50 feet, and so having a 25-foot mark doesn't make a lot of sense to us. But what we do is we have one at the 50, and then two at the 100, and then one at the 50, and then two at the 100, and we add a third little, tiny little, small visual at the 25 marks in between, so we can keep track as we see the bigger ones go, and then we have the small one that goes in there. Anchoring involves knowing how much road you have out. Road is line, chain, any combination thereof. Whatever you're using to connect the anchor to the boat is road. Knowing how much you have out is critical. You can do that by mechanical means, by counting, or by some kind of physical marker. Be consistent with your intervals. This is a project that's a whole lot easier to do when you're on land, meaning either at a dock or in a boatyard. It's really hard to do this when you're at anchor, in part because your anchor road is in use when you are on anchor. So put this on the list of things to do before you leave to go cruising. And I can't wait to share an anchorage with you when we both know how much road we've got out and we can toast to our incredible good fortune at not being in a boatyard anymore. I'm looking forward to that day. Thank you so much for listening to the Boat Galley podcast. We love hearing from our listeners. We love it when you don't forget to subscribe. We love it when we hear that something that we have shared has helped you make boat life better, because that is, after all, what the Boat Galley is all about. Have the most spectacular week.